Bill, thank you for joining us again. I want to ask you a question off the bat. We're talking about Russia, Ukraine, and some other issues related to that. But the first thing I want to ask you right off the bat is Vladimir Putin still after you? We know that there have been significant efforts to get you into Russian custody. Is he still after you? And have you seen I, any, I guess, evidence of that lately?
Well, so there's a whole, since the Magnitsky Act was passed in 2012, which freezes assets and bans visas of Russian human rights violators, Putin has put me in his crosshairs. He's been after me with death threats, kidnapping threats, arrest warrants, lawsuits, troll farms, movies, everything. And that hasn't abated. Just to give you an example, I'm currently being sued by a Russian individual named Rinat Akhmetshin. Rinat Akhmetshin, you may remember, is the guy who attended the Trump Tower meeting with Natalia Veselnitskaya in June 9th, 2016. He's suing me in Washington, D.C. federal court for calling him a spy or a former spy because I tweeted out an article, an NBC article saying that. So he didn't sue NBC, he sued me, which is just one of the many, many things. And I just use this as an example of the Russian government's sort of interest in me and attack on me. And so I don't think anything has changed. I know they have a lot more enemies, but I'm still top of, pretty high on the list. I used to be number one on the list. Vladimir Zelensky is now number one. I think Alexei Navalny is number two, but I think I'm probably solid third place in terms of Putin really having an axe to grind with me.
Well, it's pretty clear you have some pretty serious security, and we're not going to ask about that or talk about that. But what I would like to ask about, there was a very dramatic attempt a couple of years ago, I think maybe in Spain, to try to get you in custody. Have you seen anything like that again?
Well, thankfully, I've been back to Spain and they didn't arrest me the last time I was there, and I haven't been stopped at any borders. I think that's more to do with the fact that Interpol has finally found a way to cut Russia off from putting me on their wanted list. I don't think it's because Russia hasn't wanted to. Um, and I'm also probably from a travel perspective in a better place than I was 3 or 4 years ago because Russia is now seen as an evil empire. And so there used to be this kind of we need to cooperate with Russia type of stuff going on. And a lot of countries didn't want to upset Russia. And they said they're a sovereign state, a legitimate sovereign state. You know, if they issue an arrest warrant, we have to honor it. And I think now with the invasion of Ukraine and the bombing and killing of civilians, people in Europe are a little less likely to do that.
Well, speaking of where Russia is and what the world thinks of Russia, a lot of this understanding has come from Vladimir Putin's actions in Ukraine and just before Ukraine, and certainly recently. You know, he's on again, off again, talking about using nuclear weapons, and it's not clear what he really thinks. And but you know him pretty well, not personally, I'm sure, but you know pretty well that how to kind of figure out what's going on with him, and how would you explain to us what it is that's going on with Vladimir Putin and his back and forth on nuclear weapons?
Well, first of all, I would warn everybody just to completely and absolutely flush down the toilet the transcript of any speech or any article he's ever written. There's no truth to anything he's ever said or written down because he's just a sort of a sociopathic or psychopathic, I think a better description, con man. Um, and we've seen so much record of him contradicting himself, doing things that he claimed he wasn't going to do, et cetera. So put that just aside. Um, Putin is at war in Ukraine for one very simple reason, which is he's desperately afraid that if he loses power, he'll be arrested, impoverished, and killed. And therefore, he's got to stay in power until the end of his natural life. And and so, how does a dictator stay in power who's been around for 22 years and has stolen almost all the money that the country has accumulated? You start a war, and this war that he's started had kind of had the effect that he wanted it to have, which was for the first few months, his approval rating shot up, just like they did in previous wars that he started, like in taking Crimea and Eastern Ukraine back in 2014 or Georgia in 2008. But this time around, he encountered something which he hadn't really bargained on, which was that the Ukrainians were going to fight back and fight back like it was nobody's business. And then he also didn't anticipate that the U.S. and the European Union and the UK would provide Ukraine with really powerful weapons to fight back. And he didn't anticipate that his army would lose 65,000 troops and another 65,000 unable to go into battle anymore because of injuries and prisoner situations and so on. And so now he's in this terrible situation where he's losing the war on the battlefield. He's desperate. He's had to go and cross the red line of starting to draft males between the ages of 18 and 60. And so now that every man in the country is either fleeing in hiding or trying to get out of the draft. And this popularity thing that he was enjoying, I don't think is turning out so well. And so he's got to find a way to fix this. And he's going to try everything. And his speech yesterday was really telling, because there were sort of two groups of people he was sort of reaching out to in his speech. One was he was praising the Chinese dictator Xi Jinping, talking about how great friends they were, because he's hoping to have the support of the Chinese, which hasn't come through the way he wanted it to. And then he's starting to do this whole Christian values thing, hoping to appeal to the far right in the United States, hoping that will somehow come his way, and the U.S. will in some form in the future start to object to helping the Ukrainians fight their war.
Mm.
Everything is on the table for Vladimir Putin,
Sure.
including the use of nuclear weapons. And so I know he's a desperate man. He doesn't have any sense of responsibility, any compassion, any empathy, anything like that.
So, yeah, hard to say how many people believe anything that he says. As you say, we shouldn't. And, there are a lot of people who might have before, but they certainly have seen in the last months that, he certainly is not a very nice man at all. But one thing I want to ask you about, you said that he's concerned about being arrested, impoverished, and killed. And one of the things that, I struggle with and a lot of people struggle with is Putin is the most powerful man in Russia right now. And it seems as though everybody in his circle and those who are beholden to him are afraid of him. So where would this threat to him come? How would he end up in that situation? Who would start this charge or lead this charge to arrest, impoverish, and kill him?
Well, he's a dictator of a country. For 22 years, he and the 1,000 people around him have stolen $1 trillion, $1,000 billion from the Russian state over those 22 years. That $1 trillion should have been spent on healthcare, roads, schools, etc. It was spent on yachts, private planes, and villas. And so now he's in a situation where he just doesn't. It's a pressure cooker. He doesn't know when it might explode, and it wouldn't be, some predictable group of people that do this. It could just be anything. I mean, look at what's happening in Iran right now. The religious police kill one woman that they arrest, and the whole country is burning. And Putin understands that's the kind of stuff that happens in a tightly wound dictatorship, and that's what he's afraid of. It's not like there's a coup cooking on the horizon he can identify. He just doesn't know where it's going to come from, and all he knows is that he's created it's like a forest full of dry leaves, and it hasn't gotten any rain for months and months, and all it takes is one match and the whole thing goes on fire. That's what Russia is right now. And that's what he was afraid of. And he wasn't wrong to be afraid of that. I mean, if he looks at all the democracies around the world post-COVID, Boris Johnson's not around. Mario Draghi is not around. The Israeli president's not around. Bolsonaro is probably not going to be around. And Donald Trump's not around. All sorts of people in democracies get replaced. And there's the same tendency in non-democracies, except it happens in a more violent fashion.
One last thing, the war in Ukraine and people in Russia, You talked a little earlier about troops and Russia running out of troops and Putin trying to take troops. Most of them are ethnic minorities, and that's a sad commentary as well. But based on what you've seen so far, how would you say this war effort, Russia's war against Ukraine, is going for Russia?
It's going miserably. It's a disaster for Russia. It's a total, everything. So Russia, the state has been hollowed out by corruption for the last 22 years, and that hasn't. It's not like the military avoided that. They have a $70 billion military budget, and 80 to 90% of that 70 billion was stolen. And so the planes can't fly because they've sold the spare parts on the MiGs to the Indians. The tanks can't go forward because the soldiers stole the gas out of the tanks. The whole thing is just rotten from top to bottom, and the soldiers themselves don't have any reason to fight. They don't understand why they're there in the first place, and so the whole thing has been a total disaster. It's a meat grinder for Russian troops. They're going in and getting killed left, right, and center, and it's just it's a 0 out of 10 as far as performance goes, and we all, and it's not just the loss of troops and equipment and so on. It's the loss of prestige. We all thought that Russia was the second most powerful military in the world. Turns out they're probably not even in the top 10. I bet the Finns could kick their ass in a one-on-one battle. And here they have Ukraine, and Ukraine was outnumbered, outgunned in dramatic proportion, and they're the ones pushing the Russians back. It's really unbelievable.
Indeed, it is. Bill Browder, CEO of the Hermitage Fund and the leader of the Global Magnitsky effort. Thank you again for your time, Bill.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. And I would just ask if you would please subscribe to us as we continue to do this important reporting. Thank you.